Hello, everybody. This is Hondo Carpenter, your Las Vegas Raiders beat writer on SI and the host of the Las Vegas Raiders Insider Podcast, bringing back a man that needs no introduction. The Super Bowl hardware that he owns says everything you need to know about him. Longtime Raider coach, the one and only, the great Tom Walsh. And we asked Coach to join us because he knew Al Davis very well. He worked for Al a long time. They were not just an employer and an employee, they were legitimate friends. And he knew Carol Davis as good as anybody who's not family of hers and her legacy. And what a loss it was to Raider Nation to lose the first lady of Raider football. And coach, obviously, condolences to you for losing a friend. But Carol Davis, share with us, I mean, what was she like behind the scenes?
But she always asked us to call her Caroli. And so, I first got to Oakland. I was like 32. And, the funny thing about it is she was the perfect balance to Al. She knew what he was like. And she kind of was I tell you, it's like she was like the den mother. And, she always asked how you were doing. She always had a smile on her face. And we'd see her on the road trips. And she and Marge Albo and some of the other ladies would be out walking, shopping, and going through the streets. And we'd come into town someplace like a Cincinnati on a Friday night, and Saturday after a walkthrough, we'd get out and stretch our legs and everything. And she was so gracious all the time and so polite, so understanding, because she knew how competitive Al was. Let's be honest. I mean, his idea was the just win baby was his life. That was his mantra. And so she did a great job in trying to level out the playing field a little bit so we always didn't feel like the hammer was coming down.
Mm. I was told once about her something I thought was pretty funny. Someone said to me who loved Al and loved her, they said the funny thing about her is she was the only one who would really look at Al and say stop, or look at him and they go, and he wouldn't like it, but he would listen to her. Would you talk about that side? Because obviously he held immense respect for her.
No, that's true. And respect was key. And he understood not only his perspective, but also respected and understood fully her perspective and how she looked at the players and she looked at the coaches. And, I remember with Ted Hendricks and Willie Brown and guys like that, they just thoroughly were, had the utmost of respect for Caroli. And, but yeah, I get back to the point, she was like the den mother. She watched over everybody and kind of, made sure that we all were getting a little bit of sugar in our own ways, that she could deal with us and help us and kind of assure us that we counted, that we had, input in the organization's success, whether you were a player or a coach. And she was always there to kind of pick up the pieces if things got a little bit tough.
I heard a story about her that I would like to ask you if it meshes with what you knew of her, or how you knew her, I guess would be probably a better way of saying it. But the person told me that they were in an airport, in a hotel, and Al Davis and her came walking in, and this fan was like, "Hi, Mr. Davis." And he was so focused on thinking about the game the next day that he walked right by the person, and he wasn't being rude. He really didn't hear him. And when she told him Al and he stopped, it wasn't like she told him Al like she was correcting him. She knew he wouldn't want to walk by one of his fans. And that here he was so ingrained in thinking about the game plan that he stopped, walked back, and spent 15 minutes visiting with this Raider fan. And that they talked about, they were yin and yang together. She was almost so focused on people, he was so focused on football, but it worked. Did you see that type of relationship from them?
Well, yeah, and it's true because she understood the intensity with which he faced every minute of the day. He used to always kind of joke around and say, I'll love you like a son. It's a job to you, but this is my life. And he would kind of exaggerate with that little Southern, dialogue and everything. But yeah, it was his life. And Caroli was very aware of it. And she realized that his focus and his intensity was always going to be on football, the organization, the acquisition of players, the utilization of players, the X's and O's concepts that were always going through his mind. And that's where she came in to be able to balance out the scales of justice, so to speak, and make sure that it didn't get so overbearing that we all felt like it was just, total heavily weighted in the wrong direction. She was the counterbalance to all that.
So I was told that what made their relationship work was that she totally wanted him to be him. She didn't try to change him, and he wanted her to be her, and he didn't try to change her, and it worked that way. Is that how you saw it?
Well, no, but that's the way it functioned. That's the way it operated. And that's why they were such a good fit for each other. I remember, unfortunately, she had a stroke years ago, back in the early 80s. And he sat by her bedside and he was there and just worshiped the ground on which she worked, lived, and everything. And he just was totally immersed in her well being and her health and just wished her to get well. But yeah, they had that intense. The great thing about Al Hondo, people don't realize the loyalty which Al had to players, coaches, and others. It was phenomenal. And you go back in history and look at what he's done for players and for coaches and for families, disadvantaged and things like that. Things that he did not want published, he did not want let be known in public. But he was that kind of guy.
Mm. You mentioned her stroke. I heard an interesting story that someone said they always knew he loved her and that was never in doubt. But when she had her stroke, it really hit them that family and her was more important to him than football. And they said they had never thought of Al outside of the paradigm of football until that happened, and that she brought out in him the soft side like nobody could. Did you notice that when she went through that?
Well, that's the way he was. And the thing about it is, that gets back to the loyalty factor and how tied in he was to an individual, in this case, Caroli, where he actually just basically pulled up a chair and sat there next to, her bed while she was bedridden and suffering from the repercussions of the stroke and everything. And that's where he was. That was his life at that time. He was immersed. He was totally focused on that. And that's what mattered most to him. And everything else took a back seat.
Wow, fascinating. Absolutely fascinating to me. What a fascinating lady that she was, and just how she handled so much. Coach, let's turn our attention to football. You are a football, it's who you are. And I love talking football with you. I love when you break down route trees and everything else. I'm just curious. Ashton Genty, number 6 overall pick, a young man that most people in the NFL said to me they felt like was the best running back prospect since Saquon Barkley. Everyone said they didn't think he was Saquon, but the best since Saquon. What's been your early observations of him? How much would you love to be able to tinker with him in a Tom Walsh offense?
I tell you, running the football to me is such, there's a genius to design runs, blocking schemes to be able to feature running backs and their attributes and the skill set which they have. It gets back to being able to configure a package that suits the skill set of the player. To be honest, I was spoiled. I'm at 32 years of age in there, and I got a Marcus Allen. Then later on, we got a Bo Jackson, we got a Roger Craig, we got Eric Dickerson. You know, we got Hall of Fame running backs in that organization who could not only run, but they could pass protect and they could run routes and they could catch balls. Marcus was an ex-quarterback at Lincoln High School in San Diego. He could throw the ball. He played fullback at USC. He could have been a free safety. When you have, and I look at this young man and I just think about the types of runs about which we can structure and configure predicated on his abilities. Here's a classic case of what Honda, about which I'm speaking. We get Eric Dickerson, comes to the Raiders. I'm out there in the quad in the patio by the weight facility, and I meet him for the first time. I said, now Eric, there's a lot to this offense. And I don't want to spin your wheels trying to get you to do things for which you don't have any background. What are your best runs? If you could tell me, if you could have 3 runs that I can call for you, what are the runs that you can run at which you can read the best, you can make the best cuts, you feel the most comfortable running those runs? What are they? I said, okay, we'll make sure that when you're playing, those runs will be the runs that feature your attributes, your skill set, your talents. And the same thing with this young man. I'd go back, I look at his Boise State tapes, and then I'd bring him in, I'd sit him down and say, don't draw it up here. Show me what you like. What are your reads? How are you reading this? And how we can best utilize your skill set, and then take our offensive line and our tight ends, the fullback, whomever, and put together a package to be able to feature what this young man does best. I do the same thing with him on flare controls and pass routes for him out of the backfield, whether he be a check down guy or whether he might be a featured receiver like on a rail route or whatever when you run a mesh concept. But I would find out and ask him personally, I want the player to have a vested interest, Hondo, in what we're doing offensively, not just being a joystick quarterback or being, this is not bad. This is not EA. Okay. This is real football. It's about what they can do best, and for which they can feel comfortable to execute. Because if they have a vested interest in what is being run offensively, they are going to perform much better because they know they have a contribution, they have input in what's going on. They're not just out there as a tool running plays that, you sit there at midnight coming up with some new idea.
Coach, I was talking to an NFL coach recently who said to me, he goes, back in the day, we practiced for 2 months, had 6 preseason games. So when we got to the season, we were ready. And he said, now you're not even playing real football till October because of the way training camp, you practice 2 days, you get a day off, you only practice in pads X amount of days, you only get 1 practice a day. And he said this to me, and I thought of you the moment he said it. He said, the NFL is now going to go to 18 games very soon, and we've hurt the product, and guys can't tackle. We're still trying to, September now. He goes, I don't even call it real football. I call it September football. And to me, the season doesn't start till the 1st of October. I would love your thoughts. He's from your era. I would love your thoughts on that thinking process and how the game has changed. Fans are still thinking of it the old way, but it's not the old way anymore. Could you dig into that for us?
Hondo, I have been preaching this since day one for who knows how many months and how many years. September now really is preseason football for the first 4 weeks of the season. We are looking at players, as you had mentioned, Hondo. They don't get many reps in the preseason. They barely play in any of the 3 preseason games. They basically are practicing, they're having walkthroughs, jog throughs. They don't run a lot of full speed stuff during training camp. OTAs now, oh yeah, we're having an OTA. Well, all of a sudden you read in the media how a coach is suspended and eliminated the last day of OTAs. He's letting the players go on vacation early. I hate to say it, a lot of it they claim is due to injury prevention and preservation of a player's career, the longevity of which a player can have in the NFL. But they have basically made it, it's a little bit softer than it used to. Now, players are bigger, they're faster, they're stronger, they hit harder. But Hondo, the thing that strikes me the most, I go through the injury list each week and I do some other podcasts and things. There are so many soft tissue injuries that are occurring week in and week out that never occurred in previous generations because the players went through training camp. They went through a physical preparation for the season. Now we have players who basically are, they look great. They got 6%, 8% body fat. They look like underwear models and all that, but they're not football ready. They don't have the football fat that they need on their body to be able to get them. Some of the players I remember, even back in 07, 06, 07, they couldn't make it through the first two segments of practice. They were gassed. They didn't have enough fuel to burn because they were so concerned about being fit and trim and 6%, 5% body fat. They didn't have enough fuel to burn to get through a practice. They couldn't make it through the first 45 minutes. They were on their knees, trainer, hey, they were out of gas. They had no fuel to burn. And I think the league emphasis and focus has changed how the game is played today. Unfortunately, I don't see it going back to the way it was. And so it's like the new era of what the NFL is going to be. When you increase the schedule and you start going overseas, and Goodell wants to have every team have a game abroad. So you're going to have 16 weeks of international football, which includes travel time and changes in diet and sleep and routine and all that. It's all about the money. The thing about today is that Goodell's got a mindset where he wants to be able to gross, I think it's, 25 or $27 billion in gross revenues by the year 2027. And heck, a year and a half ago, they were at 13 billion, and he wants to more than double that in the next 3 or 4 years. So it's about revenue. It's about franchise value. But, to be honest, it's not real football for the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season.
Coach, I'm going to tell a funny story. I'm sure you remember who the great pitcher Warren Spahn was.
Yes.
And years ago, I was fishing across the street from his farm in Hartshorn, Oklahoma. And he was an older man, and he came over and asked me if I was catching anything, and we started visiting. And obviously, I knew he was Warren Spahn, and he invited me to have a sandwich with him. And we were having a sandwich and we were talking about baseball. And he said to me, baseball's not the same anymore. And I didn't get the hint from him that he hated baseball at all. I'm not trying to imply that. But he talked about when he was first starting to pitch, he gave up 11 hits in a row and was down 7-0 in the first inning. And he said, I pitched all 9 because I asked him, I said, what did you feel like when they pulled you? And he looked at me, he goes, pulled me? I said, yeah. And he goes, we pitched, son. We were starting pitchers. We were expected to pitch our way out of it, learn how to pitch. And I said, well, what did you do with like 100 or 125 or 135 pitch count? He laughed at me. And he said something I'll never forget. He said, they keep adding teams, and the quality of player now that used to be a 1A guy is now making it into the league in more games. Here's where I'm going with this, Coach. They keep adding more games. There's more teams. We've got to do something to protect records, because I hear people say, oh, they're going to break an O.J. Simpson record. Well, not if they're playing more games. They're not breaking the record. It may be more yards in a season, but it's not breaking a game. I think we've got to protect the heritage of the game. Listen, the toothpaste isn't going back in the tube. We understand that. We get it. But I think we need to do something to protect some of these records because we're minimizing what the game used to be. Am I just an old man here, or do you agree with some of what Warren Spahn rubbed off of me?
No, I agree wholeheartedly. I love the fact that you bring up Warren Spahn because he was a left-hander. I was a left-hander. Fred Bolitnikoff, who, coached with us and played for us for 1,000 years, and he and I, coached wide receivers and quarterbacks and all that stuff. And he used to call me Warren and Spahny and Lefty because he used to laugh because of the wind up and the delivery that I had was so similar to Spawn. But the game is no longer what it was. See, we've passed that. And this younger generation, the fans that are now coming into the game in droves, not only here in the States, but internationally, which is where the real money market is for the NFL, you know, they only know what they see today. And, you know, you've got, it's like in baseball, pitchers are on a pitch count. You know, football has become as much non-contact as you can make it during the week with the walkthroughs and the meetings and the jog throughs and the non-contact phases. But they'd be like this. Let's say, for example, Hondo, that you were a golfer and you're playing in a tournament on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but I don't let you swing a club or hit a ball, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, but then I'm putting you out on the course for a championship round golf on, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. What kind of quality of golf are you going to play after having your clubs in the closet for 4 or 5 days and then go out to the course and have to compete, on a championship tour?
Great point there, Coach. That makes a lot of sense. Coach, before I let you go, I got 2 Raider questions that I would like your help with. I've covered this team for 6 years. You've been around a lot longer, the Raiders, than that, and I cede that to you. But in the entire time I've coached this team, all I've heard from the fan base is they want the coach and GM fired. And there's been multiples. I understand Raider Nation's frustration. The franchise has told them just win, and that's not what they've done. But I am an advocate. I'm going to go back. They had Gruden. They had Rich Bisaccia. They had Josh McDaniels. They had Antonio Pierce. Now they bring in Pete Carroll, and Pete's resume speaks for itself. That they're never going to get continuity, firing 6 head coaches and 6 general managers. That they need to get behind Pete, let him call the shots, and let them at least attempt. Because it's not just about consistency, it's about winning. And you're never going to win if you don't at least get on one page where you can start accumulating players who work to one system. Where am I wrong?
You're not. Here's the thing, okay, Honda, if I could, lay out a game plan as to how I would approach this thing, if I were sitting in Pete's shoes, I tell you, I hate to go back. I used to laugh at the Yogi Berra-ism. So the game is 90% physical, the other half is mental, or the game's 90% mental, the other half's physical. You've got to deal with the mental aspect with all these players and these coaches. And it's almost like nowadays in the professional sports, you need a sports psychologist, a sports therapist, an independent person who can work with these individuals and be able to help their own selves in terms of self-image, self-respect, and how they view themselves. And then nowadays you're bringing people in and they're all making millions of dollars. They all were phenoms where they were previously, but now they have to fit into a team element where they all cannot be the same thing that they were back when they were the star, when they were the featured guy. Because now all of a sudden you come into the league and you got a squad out there, you got 53 guys who all were stars. Well, but you've got to be able to get them all to play together. You've got to be able to get them all to work together and to have a vision together and understand it's not as much of the I and the me, but the we and the us concept. And there's a whole process of educating them at their young ages as to how they can go about this process. And so I think there's a lot of things that can be done off the field that can help to, nowadays the big word, Hondo, everybody's talking about culture, the culture in the locker room, the culture in the, hey, wait a minute, whether you call it a culture or a mindset, I prefer to say the mindset. I don't like that culture stuff. I want the mindset of the player. I want them to feel that they have an integral part. I want them to understand what their roles are. And I want them to be able to come to me and say, I've got an issue, I've got a problem. I want to be able to go to them and I want to be able to walk up to this quarterback, Geno Smith, say, okay, Geno, what patterns do you like? What do you know how to read? What do you know how to throw? What are your best plays? Because I've done that with other quarterbacks going back into the early 80s. Because it's not about what I like, it's about what you can do as a quarterback, what you can execute. I've had receivers come up and say, I can run a corner route on this guy. I can get open. I can make it work. Fine. We call the play. You're out there. We're running it. And they have a vested interest in it. And see, I think today's players, rather other than just the big game checks they're getting, they really want to feel like they have an input. It's like, okay, we're talking about we're going to go on the road. What do you all want for your pregame meal? What do you want on your platter? What do you want at the buffet table? What do you want on Sunday morning before the game? Hey, give me your suggestions. Give me your feedback. Let me know what you want that we can allow you to have that allows you to go out and play better for us. I want you to be in a good frame of mind to play. I want you to have a positive feeling, not only about yourself, but about your teammates, about the organization. I want you to have input. I want you to contribute so that, you've got money in the pot. You've anteed up. And so you've got a stake and an investment in our success.
Coach, last question for me, but it's something that I don't understand. And I know NFL people have asked me what's going on. And I'm going to just voice to you a criticism I've had of the Raiders this year. And if you think I'm unfair, you and I are close enough that you can tell me you think I'm full of baloney, and I'm not going to get mad at you because I have so much respect for you. But Chip Kelly at his first press conference talked about he didn't really have a system. He developed his system around what his players could do. So the Raiders went out, couldn't get Matthew Stafford, the future Hall of Fame quarterback. I applaud them for swinging. I would want him too. And they go get Geno Smith, who's had his greatest success running the play action pass when he's throwing the ball from under center. And now, high percentage of the time he's running a gun. He's got a running back and a pistol. And there seems to be a disconnect. I've asked Pete Carroll about it. He's like, this is what we want to do. That was in the game plan. Well, it didn't happen. And it just seems to be a disconnect. I know you're not in the building. I know you're not the offensive coordinator anymore. But, and I also know you've forgotten more about football than I know. But the reality is, it appears to be a disconnect. Is that too big of a leap for me to say that? Because I'm hearing that from people in the league asking me, what's going on? What's the disconnect? Does there seem to be one to you?
Unfortunately, yes. Okay, here's the thing, Hondo. If I were sitting there today as OC or whatever, I'd say, okay, I'd bring in the quarterbacks. I'd sit down with Geno. I'd say, okay, go up on that board, take the whiteboard. I don't want to see all this fancy electronic. Take out your dry erasable pen, walk up to that whiteboard. I want you to put up a formation and put up a pattern that that you can run, that you can execute. And then I'm going to sit there and say, okay, now, Geno, if it's cover 2, where are you going to go with the ball? If it's cover 4, where are you going to go with the ball? Where's your slide? Where's your protection? Where are your hots? Where's your side adjust concepts? I want to put them up there and say, okay, show me what you got. And, I think it starts with that. It starts with the players, not with plays. I could put 1,000 plays on the whiteboard. I could paper your walls around that whole organization, the whole street. I can draw thousands of plays. I've got software that's got thousands of plays with AI and everything in it. It's not about the plays. It's about the players. And with the quarterback, you've got to be able to look at what he can do, what experiences that he's had in the past, and how he can function. And put them up there on the whiteboard and say, okay, hey, where are you going to go with cover four? Where are you going to go with weak quarter halves? Where's the read? And, allow them to give you the feedback, because here's the thing. By doing that, I find out A, what they know about the game, B, how they respond, and C, I make them have to think about it, where they have to be able to say, okay, I like this, I don't like that. I go back to the old days. We would give the quarterbacks the game plan, whether it's 1st and 10 play action, 1st and 10 drop back, 2nd and long drop back, 2nd and long play actions, third down. We had third down broken down 1 to 2, 3 to 5, 6 to 9, 9 to 12, 12 yards and up. And we'd have patterns in the low red zone, high red zone, and I would make them number every play, 1 through whatever, as to how they liked the play. Now, I may have liked the play, and, heck, all of a sudden the quarterback goes, oh, that's number 7 on his list. Well, he's out on the field. I'm not going to call the play that he numbered number 7. I'm going to call his play that he numbered number 1. And it's about them and the player, not a play that I may like. If they don't understand it, why am I going to make them run that play? It's not going to be successful. I go back to the story of Joe Montana one time. He's in the huddle, and Joe was very successful. He came up for discussion for trade to the Raiders on several occasions with Bill Walsh. And Joe turns to the guys in the huddle and goes, can you believe that Bill sent me in this piece of shit play to run? He says, this ain't going to work. And see, that's the whole point. You've got to have players who believe in what you're giving them to do. So if they have a vested interest, Hondo, in the play design, the play outcome, they're going to make sure it works, because they have got their sweat equity into that play. And to me, that leads to much greater success.
Well, Coach, your Super Bowl hardware speaks for itself. And that's something that, you're going to be remembered for forever. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your Carroll Davis stories. Thank you for all of it. You have been a great friend to me, a great teacher, a great example, and I appreciate you and your friendship. And I thank you for taking time to chat with us tonight.
Oh, you're more than welcome. Besides Caroli now, also it's been a tough year for the Raiders. Cheryl Nichols passed,
George,
Jim Otto, and then today George Atkinson. It's not been a good year, quote unquote, for the health of great names and great personalities in the Raider organization. And so I'm sure a lot of former players and coaches, and also some current players and coaches, can recall those great names from this organization who spent decades. Jim Otto, my goodness gracious, Double O, he is like Mr. Raider, and everybody knows, heck, I was a kid when I remember Jim Otto playing back in the 60s. But anyway, yeah, the greatness of the club also goes back all to the great personalities who also made it so special.
You just mentioned George Atkinson, who passed away today, and I've heard so many people talk about his toughness. What was it about him that impressed you?
The thing about it is, back in the old days, our secondary was called the Soul Patrol. They were going to make you pay. Let me tell you, of course, the league was different. Nowadays, they're playing patty cake in the secondary. You breathe on a guy, it's a 5-yard penalty for illegal contact or whatever. Back in the old days, I used to kid Cliff Branch, who was a great wide receiver, Hall of Fame player, weighed 171 to 176 pounds. And you're out there with corners in the old days who could bang you around until the ball came in. There was no illegal chuck rule. You were open season. Back in the old days, you go back and look at the size of some of the wide receivers. They were 215, 220, 225. Well, then you had corners like Willie Brown and all these other great corners in the league would pound on you, and it was a different ball game. But yeah, George was one of those guys. And you look at the Jack Tatums and Atkinson and all those great secondary players that the Raiders had, who came from HBCUs. Let's be honest, that's another thing. Al was fantastic. He would send us out to we would go through the HBCU schools, the historically black colleges and universities, and you look at the players. And I remember you get a Raymond Chester drafted, and you get an Art Shell drafted from Maryland Eastern Shore, and the rest of the league goes, where the heck is that school? Who is this guy? Well, Al had people out there looking for those players all the time, and the Gene Upshaws at Texas A&I. You know, it was back in the day. He was a trendsetter and a trailblazer when it came to finding talent.
Awesome. He is the one and only, the legend, the great Tom Walsh. Thanks, Coach.
You're welcome, Hondo.
Appreciate you and your friendship.